Alright, and now it's my turn for the 2018 Game of the Year picks, shoutouts, etc. My shoutouts for 2018 being games that I didn't get to play but wanted to get to play are Dragon Quest XI. So it's a series I've always had my eye on just because it's interesting. It's a JRPG. I'm a huge fan of JRPGs. Also, the art style is by the Dragon Ball Z guy, and from what I've been told, they're pretty good too. Another shout out is Castlevania Rondo of Blood. Although it's not a new game, it just recently got re-released. Now American players can play it as by the PSN version for the PS4. Comes with Symphony of the Night, which is also cool. Wanted to play it, have it, didn't get to play it, so kind of unfortunate there. Sunset Overdrive. Technically, it's an older game, but it did just get re-released on Steam, so I'm counting it. I definitely wanted to play it, and I'll be picking it up as soon as is possible for me. The Spiral Remaster is also up there because I didn't get to actually play it. I did get to watch our friend Ali play it, which was really fun. It looks like a lot of fun, and I played the Spiral 2. We played it on our channel a long time ago, but I didn't get to try the remake. We Happy Few. I absolutely wanted to check out that game because I'm a huge fan of dystopian fiction, such as 1984, Brave New World. I really like the theme that they were going for. It definitely feels a bit Bioshock-esque, which is, in my book, is a plus because the original Bioshock was great. I was pretty good on Infinite as well, so I definitely wanted to check it out. I heard it was mixed reception on it, but I'm still interested, just never got around to it. Lastly, I also want to throw Red Dead Redemption 2 into this category, a game that is so big and so important for 2018. I have it. I've been playing it. I actually did get to play it, but I didn't really get to play enough of it to get a good taste and really put it up for either Game of the Year or runner-up. I didn't like it at first. I played it immediately after playing Spider-Man. I felt it was a little bit slow. It was a really bad game to follow up Marvel's Spider-Man just because of the pacing difference. There's a 10-hour tutorial in that game, something around that. But now that I've gotten more and more into the game, I actually do like it a little bit more. I am looking forward to checking it out more and seeing how my opinion may change on it. So, and now as for my best non-2018 game that I played this year, it's actually, I have a tie. I have two games. I have Persona 3 FES. I have been a pretty big Persona fan in the last couple of years. I just got into the franchise, so I heard a lot of good things about 3. My first go around, I did not enjoy Persona 3 and I did end up putting it down. But being that 4 and 5 were some of my favorite games that I played recently, I did want to give it a second go. And I'm so glad I did because I find it so much more satisfying to come back to this game. It is way more archaic than the other games because it came before. But I'm kind of powering through it and doing my best to actually enjoy it. And I am enjoying it. Although the dungeons are kind of tiresome after a while and I lose interest in them pretty quickly, the story is top notch and keeps me guessing and keeps me playing. The soundtrack is fantastic. The characters are great. I think the characters are probably some of the best in the Persona series even, which is saying a lot because 5 and 4 had some great characters. Persona 3 is tied for my favorite game, my favorite non-2018 game that I played this year. The other one is actually DLC. It's the Shovel Knight Treasure Trove DLC. I was a pretty big fan of Shovel Knight not when it came out, but when I finally got around to playing it. I really got into it. It's a Mega Man inspired indie game. It's a ton of fun. It's very challenging. There's a cute little story to it. And the wonderful people at Yacht Club Games went ahead and gave everyone who got the first game, the original game, the DLC for free, which includes Plague of Shadows and Spectre of Torment. It's collectively called Shovel Knight Treasure Trove, and I've really been enjoying that DLC. My favorite out of the two is definitely Plague Knight. The Plague Knight DLC was super touching. I really dug the story. It had this interesting thing where I absolutely hated the game at first, because it was such a different gameplay style from the original Shovel Knight that I didn't even want to play it anymore. I thought they ruined the whole formula. But once I got used to it, it was just a breeze. And again, the DLC was super charming. If you don't believe me, just check out the dance that Plague Knight does every time you beat a boss. It's adorable. Alright, so for 2018, I felt that it was a very good year for video games, first off. A lot of great stuff came out. We had a lot of good things come out. Even though we had some downs, we had some ups this year, but I think the competition this year for Game of the Year was really tough. Watching the Keeleys this year definitely proved that, just because all the games that were in the Game of the Year category, you could make a million arguments for each one of them why they should have been the Game of the Year. Fantastic choice of games. So for me this year, Game of the Year was so much harder to pick than last year, where I basically had Yeast that was a little underwhelming, and I had Persona, which I thought was virtually flawless. So we have that. This year, it came down to 2 games. I pretty much feel equally about both games. I think they have great strong points, with a couple of flaws in there somewhere. But yeah, they're so close that I really just sat back and forth, trying to figure out what my Game of the Year is. But I did eventually come to a decision, and let's get right into that right now. My pick for the 2018 Game of the Year award came down to 2 games, and they are Spider-Man and Valkyria Chronicles 4. Two fantastic games. They have some really good pros about both of them. The couple cons that I honestly feel are kind of leveled. So let's start with Spider-Man. Marvel's Spider-Man was a masterful translation of the comic book hero into a video game. A lot of people have already said this before. This is not a unique concept, but it's not a unique idea to me. But this is the best Spider-Man game since like Spider-Man 2. It's been a really long time since there's been a Spider-Man game that's been this good. They did a fantastic job. One of the big criticisms against it is that it's basically a Batman Arkham style game. We could really go back and forth about this. However, I will say if it is a Batman Arkham clone, it is the best version of that type of game style. When I compared this game to Batman Arkham City, Batman Arkham, honestly, those games were so boring compared to this. Like, I love Batman Arkham Asylum, but honestly, Spider-Man just blows them out of the water, so it's not even close. Yeah, you could say it's an Arkham-esque game, but it does the job so much better than those games that I honestly don't care. It's such a fantastic game. It's a really good representation of New York City. The best one, really, that you can get into a video game. I love GTA 4. It's my favorite Grand Theft Auto game, more or less. And I love the world that they have in that game. But it's going to be really hard to go back to GTA 4 after playing Spider-Man, because you're just so efficiently, so quickly, so satisfyingly getting from point to point in that game. You can run up buildings, you can web swing, you can do so much stuff in that game. It's the definitive way to experience New York in a video game. Even though it's not experiencing New York for real, you're a freaking superhero, for crying out loud. So if you know anything about me, you'd know that I'm not the type of person that's going to sit there and talk about how amazing the graphics are in a game. But it has to be said, the graphics in this game are pretty good. The textures in them are done so well. The attention to detail to the world itself is fantastic. It's just a pretty game no matter which way you look at it. They did the lighting in the game very well. At first I found it a little bit strange the way they had the lighting in that game. I thought that there was something wrong with my TV and the contrast was way off. But they actually do kind of capture this thing about New York City really well, that New York City is either very well lit or it's incredibly harsh and shadowy. I'm not an expert on photography or lighting or anything like that. So I can't explain it much better than that, but just look at that game and walk around New York City and tell me that Insomniac didn't actually sit there and think about what is the best way that we can capture New York City in the game. Oh, I know, the lighting, and they figured it out. I think they did a fantastic job with that. Furthermore, on the graphics comment, the spider suits are so detailed and nice. One of the best parts about it really is you get, I think, 20 something spider suits to pick through, the funny thing is that honestly, the first one looks so amazing. You don't even need the rest of them. They're all fantastic, but that first one it's such a nice version of Spider-Man. The detail in the suit is so perfect that I actually enjoyed watching the loading screen, so that you can kind of pan the camera around and move him around, just to see the quality that went into creating his suits. So although I found the story and characters to be a little bit inaccessible at times to a non-comic book fan, I still picked up on details pretty quickly. I forgot a lot of the backstory I don't know, and I kind of just went with it, and I had a good enough time. So it isn't anything that deters me too much. But yeah, the story and characters did shine really bright in this game. I loved a lot of the supervillains, although I wanted to see more of the first one. I think he was Destructo or something like that. I wanted to see more of him. Him and Spider-Man had a fantastic dynamic. The story was really good, kept me guessing. It had a lot of really good twists too, which was really nice. A lot of times I just didn't see things coming, and I couldn't see how they could progress further from here. So the climax of the game, which I will not get into spoiler territory, was written and performed so well, which is the reason why I made sure to nominate Yuri Lowenthal for the performance of the year in our categories, because I just thought it was so... They did that scene so well that I actually went back immediately after the game and I replayed it a second time. And I enjoyed it just as much as I enjoyed it the first. It really like pulled on a lot of emotional strings, in addition to just being from an action perspective, really cool to look at and to play. Fantastic job. I would even say that that's probably one of like my 15 or top 20 greatest video game endings of all time, which is saying a lot because there's a lot of really good ones up there. Now, one of the issues that I did have, one of the negative parts about this game, it is a gameplay point, which was that combat felt very tedious. For me, the negatives are actually a lot of gameplay stuff. So, for example, it just felt tedious after a while to do the combat. I felt like in these moments, the plot and the story, which again I was so into, came to a grinding halt. Which is a shame, because you don't want that to happen. I just want to see more of the story. As much as I was okay with the gameplay at first, I didn't really care about that as much as I did seeing what was around the next corner in terms of story, what was going to happen to Peter Parker, and so on and so forth. I found myself doing certain parts over and over and over again, and that's not what you want to be doing in a game like this. You want to just keep moving forward. They will pit so many waves of guys against you, and one of the issues is that when they pit 10 waves against you, and let's say you die on wave number 8, you have to go all the way back to the beginning and start from scratch. There are no checkpoints for the basic bad guy like type of combat sections. So when you're fighting low-level grunts, you will have to still go all the way back to the beginning. The funny thing about that is they could have really used them there. If I die at wave 8, why not bring me back at wave 5 or at least 4 or something like that? Why do I have to go all the way back to the beginning and fight the same 40 guys I just fought over and over? It felt super grindy. And what's more is that they had checkpoints in the game for certain points, but with boss fights. I didn't really get them as much with the regular combat, but almost all the bosses had checkpoints, and I really didn't understand that. A boss fight is not that... You'll have some difficulty, but you can usually get through a boss fight pretty quick in this game, for all of the bosses. So I don't understand why they felt the need to give you checkpoints, and then if you do happen to die, personally, I would have rather have been sent back all the way to the beginning for the bosses. Because if I do get a checkpoint, it almost feels so short, like I'm cheating myself out of the proper experience. So I don't understand why they couldn't have just flipped that. Where they needed checkpoints, they didn't have them. I don't see a reason why Spider-Man has to be struggling with low-level bad guys when they could just checkpoint you through that part of the game. It was super grindy and a major turnoff. As a side note, though, I think it's really interesting to say, I'm really surprised that Insomniac would actually screw up gameplay like this, because Insomniac is known for being fantastic at gameplay for games like Spyro and games like Ratchet and Clank. I never had any problems with those games, but here I wouldn't even say that they made it too difficult. It felt super grindy. Like they didn't know when to stop those combat sections. It almost felt like what people don't like about the Uncharted games, which is that they just send waves of bad guys at you, never ending. I do give a pass to Uncharted, but in Spider-Man, it just felt I can't extend that same. It still just bothers me so much that at points I almost felt like there was something wrong with me or something wrong with this game. I don't want to play it anymore. But I did. I wanted to, because most importantly, I liked that little crap aside, I did like the rest of the story, the characters, other parts of the gameplay. Once again, it really breaks the flow of the game. Another thing that sucks about it is that if you start off, you're on your first wave of 10 waves of bad guys and you get hit, you lose half your health, or even you're like almost near death, you might as well just restart. Because you're not going to make it to that 10th wave unless you have all the Spidey upgrades, or you're just so good at this type of gameplay. So I honestly felt like defeated a lot of times in this game. I would just start to play it and lose a little bit of health and immediately have to restart, because I knew 2 or 3 hits from a bad guy or 1 RPG shell and I'm out anyway. Might as well just restart with a full bar of health and hope for the best this time around. Alright, and now for just some technical problems for Spider-Man. I don't like the Goat Simulator style ragdolling in the game. Whenever Spider-Man dies, he flies all over the place, kind of like you would see in Goat Simulator. I feel like it's just too silly and it doesn't fit. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe Spider-Man does that in the comic. I don't know. But I thought it was pretty out of place. Furthermore, the controls and button mapping on this game suck. It's hard to grasp even at the end. So I've already finished the game and I'm still having difficulty remembering where some things go, just because there's buttons all over the place. They do all sorts of different things and it's really hard to just keep track of it. Another thing, the frequent load times that are also really long is very annoying. I don't believe that this should be a problem on the PS4, because I get that it's a really big world, but it doesn't seem like this should be happening. I don't remember Grand Theft Auto having as many problems. That's which I just use as a comparison point by default. Furthermore, it's also very annoying when you want to quit a mission and you have to do a load screen. So again, comparing back to Grand Theft Auto, if I wanted to just go and quit a mission in Grand Theft Auto, it's usually pretty seamless. Whereas in Spider-Man, you do have to then go through another loading screen just to be put right back in the same spot, or more or less the same spot. And the game is also a little bit glitchy too. I counter a couple of bugs. I counter even one bug that I almost felt I had to restart the game. But I finessed out of that situation. Still, it kind of made me think game's a little bit buggy. Not too buggy, but just a little bit. But that's enough on Spider-Man for now. I also wanted to talk about Valkyria Chronicles 4. I just want to give a little bit of backstory first. Valkyria Chronicles 1 was a fantastic game. Sort of like a cult classic hit that did kind of get revived recently by way of being remastered, and ported to Steam. And a lot of people didn't play it as much. It was an early PS3 game, one of the earliest PS3 games, if I'm not mistaken. It's a wonderful Japanese SRPG. You can consider it an RPG, but I definitely reference it as JRPG most of the time. But it's more strategy than standard role-playing game. Well, after Valkyria Chronicles 1, there was a rocky history that followed. Namely, in the fact that when they finally got around to making a sequel, Valkyria Chronicles 2, for some reason, they decided that Valkyria Chronicles 2 was going to be exclusive to the PSP. So they were taking a PS3 game, and they're porting it to exclusively the PSP. I don't know why they decided to do it that way. I didn't really look into the history, but it caused a lot of issues. There were a lot of technical problems for Valkyria Chronicles 2. They had hardware limitations, and it also felt rushed. It felt incredibly rushed. Story pacing was all over the place. Sometimes it felt way too slow, sometimes it felt way too fast. And there was a lot of things that they tried to do with that game, besides just it being Valkyria and it was different and fresh and cool. A lot of that stuff fell short because it felt like they couldn't flesh it out enough on the platform, given the resources, given the being rushed. I came away from Valkyria Chronicles 2 really wanting to like it, but actually kind of hating it. And that's really not the fault of Valkyria Chronicles 2. It's really the fault of all the stuff that came before, all the things around it. If it was a straight PS3 game, probably wouldn't have had that problem. Then we got another problem, which was Valkyria Chronicles 3. Now that game wasn't bad, from what I understand. But the reason I say from what I understand is because not only was it only on the PSP, but it was also Japanese exclusive. It didn't even come to the West. So at that point, Sega probably just stopped caring and they said, listen, these games aren't doing well in America. We can't see why not. We port it over to the PSP. Everyone loves the PSP. So we made it they made it Japanese only, and nobody, I never got to play it. There's not an official translation of it. There's no voiceover, but there's not even just a translation of it. I would take the game in Japanese if it was just all the menus and text were in the English. But no such thing actually exists. Not an official release, anyway. And then after that, pretty much nothing. We actually did at some point, after a long drought of no new news on a Valkyria Chronicles game, we did get some rumors about a new Valkyria Chronicles. Turned out that was just a browser-based only game, had nothing to do with like the original style of the game. And then we got Valkyria Revolution. Everyone in this room knows, everyone else knows, Valkyria Revolution was pretty terrible. They tried to change up the style, didn't work at all, complete bomb. I didn't play it yet. I will play one day just out of curiosity, but it's like, from what I understand, it's just a horrible, horrible game. And at that point, it seemed like all hope was lost at that point. But thankfully, this year, Sega released finally Valkyria Chronicles 4. We finally got a break to all of that horrible history that followed one really good, really unique, really interesting game. All of the terrible decisions and all the terrible spin-off attempts that came after it, finally all of that's washed away because we have another true blue actual Valkyria Chronicle game that came out. It's on a console, not a handheld console that can't handle a lot of the stuff. Given the history of Valkyria Chronicles, you could almost say like this is just Valkyria Chronicles 2. Crazy as that sounds. But it's not. It's Valkyria Chronicles 4, and I'm so glad to say that this is the game sequel that this IP so desperately needed. It's a fantastic game, and it's exactly what Valkyria Chronicles 2 and 3 should have been, and what Valkyria Chronicles Revolution never should have been, because that game never should have existed. But this is such a refreshing feeling to get to say. We all know that long-awaited sequels for fans can be such intensely nail-biting experiences. I also want to talk about the amount of content, and I would say that the content of this game is not like the cup is half full or half empty, but the cup is overflowing. And that's even before the DLC, which I did go out and buy because I, as a person, am happy to reward a company that earns my hard-earned money for DLC. After I finished Valkyria Chronicles 4, I played a solid 2 more hours. New options and more story bits opened up post-game, and I honestly sat there and I planned the next 20 or 30 hours of gameplay and started to check out the cool little bits that were now brand new and fresh. Again, this was a refreshing feeling. Not usually how a story-centered game goes, at least not in my experience. Usually a story-focused game just doesn't have this quality, especially not at JRPGs. For a JRPG, replay value is New Game Plus, just booting up the same old game with new Game Plus, playing it at a higher difficulty, or trying to get like a different ending. I really did feel like Sega basically reinvented the concept of New Game Plus here by keeping some story bits from you that open up later on, like scattered throughout the game, in addition to just making it super interesting and rewarding to keep playing the game afterward for stuff you haven't experienced yet. It's actually the reason why in most games I never come back to them once I beat the story, because once the story's over, I generally just move on to a new game. I didn't have to do that with Valkyria Chronicles 4. The amount of content that you get at the end of the game, once you've beaten it, it honestly feels like it's a second game starts at that point. If I had to describe the amount of content that you get for your buck in Valkyria Chronicles 4 as a GIF, I would have to use the GIF where Vince McMahon is losing his shit progressively more and more and more and more. It really feels like Sega was overcompensating for the fact that we never got a proper sequel, and that's good. I understand that most likely they didn't put out enough budget for this game, but the actual creator of the game, they felt the need to give us all this content. It is a criticism that some people draw on this game. However, I do feel like they want to give you so much story and so many characters and so much to do in this game, just so that you fall in love with it, just like I did, just like so many other fans did, just like so many fans fell in love with the original Valkyria Chronicles. In doing this, they are making up for the bad history of this game. Another cool thing about this game, in my personal experience, is that it did make me interested in trophies again. Trophies are something that I used to collect way back in the day when I had more time for video games, but honestly, I just stopped doing it. It hasn't been interesting to me in a very long time, but once I beat this game, I kind of needed something to push me to play it a little bit more, or rather, I needed a guide. I've done the whole story, I've done a lot of stuff in the game. What else do I do? Oh, I don't have all the trophies. That's a great way to start exploring the game and start doing a little bit more. I completely forgot about that, and I honestly didn't even think I would be interested in trophies ever again, to be honest. So a really nice personal experience that came to me from playing this game. So let's talk about some of the cons of this game. And this was something that was very nagging to me at first, and maybe some other players, but the game does rely on a lot of not fully animated cutscenes to tell you the story. So a lot of the time you will be told the story through basically just a backdrop and some boxes with character faces inside of them. It is a bit tedious, and we'll get into some of the issues with this. This was also mentioned in a Game Informer preview that I read for this game. They probably knocked off like a point on the rating for just this by itself, but they did complain that the lack of fully animated cutscenes was an issue for them. I wish I didn't read that preview because I was looking for that, and then when I saw it, I was like extra disappointed. The funny thing is though, and they may not have known this was actually a problem with Valkyria Chronicles 2 as well. So in Valkyria Chronicles 2, once again, they had all those tech limitations. So all they could really afford to do in that game without overblowing it too big on a PSP is that you would have that same setup. A backdrop, two characters talking to each other. And it was pretty bad. It's not my ideal way to see a cutscene. It is interesting to see that still carried over into this game, and it does raise questions on what the budget was like for Valkyria Chronicles 4. How many resources was Sega allowing for this game? It's definitely disappointing to see this come back as well. It's not something that I wanted to, but I will say it is made up for when 40 plus hours into the game you realize there is so much voice acting in this game, there's so much writing in this game, there's so much content in this game, there's so many unique characters in this game that it's almost like I can understand why they only gave us a couple of fully animated cutscenes. And if we're being completely honest, we play a bunch of RPGs on this channel. A lot of RPGs do kind of do a similar thing. You know, when you think about a lot of JRPGs, will tell their story through a text box, whatever's happening in the background, and two characters talking to each other. It really isn't that much different, so I can't see it as a deal-breaking point against Valkyria Chronicles 4. However, it's been so long since I played Valkyria Chronicles 1, I don't have a point of comparison between the two. I am super interested in figuring out what it was like in Valkyria Chronicles 1. Were there more fully animated cutscenes? Did they do the same thing with the boxes? I played that game so long ago, I honestly don't remember. You do get some fully animated cutscenes, and they do look fantastic. They are really nice, and it almost serves as a kind of payoff point. That when you finally get to this point, you've done all this. You've gone through these crushing missions. You've went through all the voice work and the previous stuff in the lesser quality cutscenes, and then you finally get a nice fully animated cutscene. It really does kind of it makes you hungry for them, makes you appreciate them when you do get them more. This is the state of the game. Again, Valkyria Chronicles 4 almost never happened, as far as we're concerned, so I'm fine with this. I'm honestly fine with this. Maybe for the next time they could do better. And again, more importantly, the amount of content that you get in this game, I believe, far outweighs that problem. You can't hold it against the Game Informer reviewer, previewer, for not knowing that fact, because they probably only got maybe 10 hours into the game. They probably didn't even finish the game. So for them, there was such a bigger deal because they didn't get through much of the game to realize how much more there was to it. It's just, I think once they would have seen that the game gives you that much content, they would have been like, okay, it's not that big of an issue. At least that's what I believe, and that's how I feel on this topic. This is actually going back to a pro, but I did want to mention that the game is visually beautiful. The watercolor art style is fantastic. The anime that they have, the animated style art, fantastic. This is all stuff that you've heard before, but I do want to appreciate the fact that the game is so colorful, even though it's super bleak. This is a fantastically deep, dark game, and honestly, this is the one game where I feel like it would have been okay to make it brown. But Sega probably realized that, at some point you're going to be looking at this game for 50, 60, 80 hours. It has to look nice. So why make it brown? Why make it brown like all the rest of the games? They decided to give it beautiful, full colors, a great art style. Visually, this game is super impressive. So all plus on that. So on the subject of tone, this game is way more dark than any of the previous Valkyria Chronicles games. It's also a lot more adult in terms of language and things like that. They talk about alcohol and smoking, and it gets pretty heavy at times, pretty dark. There are a couple of topics that I'm surprised they had the balls to even talk about. This is another thing that was mentioned in that Game Informer preview, that I think they didn't really like this. The tone in their article made it seem like it was a con for them, but honestly, I think it handled it really well. I think after 6 years of not having a game, it's understandable that the audience has matured. Make the game a little bit more mature. It still has your silly anime moments, the filler and all that crap, which I am very critical towards most of the time, but it gets super dark, it's super heavy, and it's super adult, which I think they pulled off pretty well. It makes sense. It's a game about the military. You're not supposed to have all cheery, happy characters when they're fighting a giant war. Definitely fits a lot better to be adult. Although I wouldn't mind the old tone, I don't see this thing as such a negative. In fact, one of the characters is so adult, I fell in love with that character. The way that they made him, he reminded me of Ryuji from Persona 5, but if he was actually able to curse and he was actually able to be more aggressive and abrasive, it was wonderful. And for that, I think it far made up for like a tone change. I don't see the criticism there whatsoever. Another touted feature of this franchise is that there are lots of unique characters. So basically, they all have their own stories and they all have their own voice actors. You get somewhere in the ballpark of 50 or so per game. Unique characters, 100% unique characters, voiced and whatnot. I don't know too many other games that do that for you. Certainly not poorly funded, poorly treated JRPGs such as Valkyria Chronicles 4. I don't remember if in 2 this was a thing. I believe it kind of was, but I don't straight remember off the top of my head. But it's definitely been stepped up since Valkyria Chronicles 1 for sure. What you do get in the game is 17 squad stories with 2 to 3 characters per voiced scenes and a mission. Usually a mission. I think one of them may have had 2 missions. So you basically get, in addition to the story characters that you already know so much about through the main quests, you get an additional 51 characters with backstory. I mean, that's baffling. Well, and that is the prime selling point of this game. I think here it comes back to the overcompensating thing where I think they just did a fantastic job on it. They just did so well. They get new potentials from this and develop relationships. So you're not just getting more content, good quality content, more story, but you're also actually, they've worked it into the strategy as well. So now when you come out of these squad stories, your characters will interact in a different way, and it kind of grows the squad in a way. Hence, squad stories. My favorite part about this aspect of the game is that it made me love and appreciate characters that I didn't really care about initially. I would get a character, I would see them, I would use them occasionally, and I just didn't really care. You can go back and watch our stream. When I streamed this game, I was obsessed with some characters because I learned so much about them. I learned so many interesting things about them, and it was a joy to look at their backstory and these additional scenes in the game. Seeing that full list of additional story content really showed me the scope of this game. Game Informer be damned. So, I know I say this all the time, but this game's story hooked me. It was fantastic. I loved the plot twists. Everything kept me guessing at every turn. It really felt like the game kept turning it from 10 to 11 and from 11 to 12, and then it ran out of dials on the knob, and then it just kept turning and turning. It's not a perfect story, but I would say it's perfect like anime story. It's such a great story for anyone who's interested in anime but also wants to play a cool, unique strategy RPG game. I would probably say that this is the best story that I've played in a video game in the last 5 years. There were so many moments that stuck with me. There's so many characters that resonated with me. I wanted to know more about them. I wanted to look into more of their backstory. There's so many times when I felt I want to know more about this. I can't wait till I know this franchise well. I know that they're gonna do more on this. I can't wait to see them do that. And then they did it, and it was so satisfying to get to that point. It was so satisfying to get to find out more about these certain characters that they weren't telling you a lot about in the beginning. They're keeping them vague. It was just a nice page-turning equivalent of a video game story. So back on some of the cons to this game. Sorry for being all over the place, but there is the aforementioned presentation issue in that you just get some of the cutscenes are presented in just a backdrop with the faces talking at you. It does leave the door open for some confusion, primarily in that you don't really know what's going on position-wise. A cutscene will happen, some action is taking place, and you just aren't aware of what's going on because it's hard to make out from what's presented to you. That also then leaves the door open to some minor plot holes. I honestly found myself sitting there thinking, well, how is that possible? They were over here. I know why I'm feeling this way right now, because it wasn't presented very well. It did come up quite a few times in the game, and I honestly thought it could have been done better if they at least did a gameplay style cutscene where they did the cutscene with character models in the game world, but they just relied so heavily on those backdrop face cutscenes, the not fully animated cutscenes. It was kind of a drawback for sure. Another drawback is the lack of the branching class system. So in Valkyria Chronicles 2, they gave us a system where when you leveled up your class, you were able to then divide the class into subcategories, which was freaking awesome. It was so good. It really did a lot for the strategy. and it even made it feel more like an RPG game, just because then you're suddenly in control, and you have to think, well, which type of subcategory of the class am I going to go to? Once I move the class either to the left or to the right of the branch, they suddenly get perks, little pros and cons for that unit. Now this character has a new set of strong points and weak points. It was just fun. It really mixed it up. It was a genuine improvement on Valkyria Chronicles 1, and it really made it feel like a lot more of a strategy game. I liked it a lot. Wasn't in Valkyria Chronicles 4. It's so funny because you could say that was the one good thing about Valkyria Chronicles 2, and you really wouldn't be wrong because there wasn't much else there for you. So I don't see why they wouldn't take the one really good part about the game and also put it into this one. Super bummed out. I was hoping for it. I was praying that it would be in this game. It's not in this game. The game also had some jankiness to it, a little bit of glitchiness. There was like glitching with the hair and whatnot. I would say that it had a little bit more glitchiness than Spider-Man, but both games suffered with this. There were a lot of cheap deaths in Valkyria Chronicles 4. There were a lot of times where I thought that death was complete bullshit, shouldn't have happened, and again, Spider-Man had the same thing, though. They were pretty like on par with that. So, I've gone on and on about both games, but in the end, I have to pick a Game of the Year for 2018 and a runner-up for 2018. I can't pick both. It was, once again, super difficult decision for me because I liked both games so much, and I felt that on a technical level, they're both pretty evenly matched. Unfortunately, I wish that Spider-Man came out in a different year. I just think this year the competition was a little too fierce for it. It is an amazing game, but in another year, I probably would have had no problem giving that game Game of the Year. So deserves it. I actually, no bullshit, am now interested in going to check out the Spider-Man comics just because it interested me so much in the character, in the universe. Even though Spider-Man, the Insomniac game, is Spider-Man as told by Insomniac. They did take creative liberties with the game, and it's not purely Spider-Man. It's still accessible to new players because it's its own universe. But it did make me want to check out those comics. Insomniac did a fantastic job with Spider-Man. I cannot wait for the sequels, so you guys so deserve runner-up for 2018. You really put up a fight for this one for me. But yeah, my 2018 Game of the Year goes to Valkyria Chronicles 4. It's just, I've been waiting for this game for such a long time. And I have to say that as a fan of the franchise, I feel 100% satisfied with this game. So a few issues aside, Sega just more than delivered. They did such a great job with this game. I couldn't be more proud. A fan has been fully satisfied with this game after such a long period of no proper Valkyria Chronicles sequels, and they did such a great job that I honestly believe if they are working on a Valkyria Chronicles 5 and they use this game as a framework for it, I have absolutely nothing to be worried about because this game is fantastic, and if they go use it as a guide, so can Valkyria Chronicles 5. I just think there's a few areas that need improvement, and it'll be like best RPG ever. Fucking best JRPG, best JSRPG ever. One of my favorite Sega RPGs. Valkyria Chronicles 4 legitimately gave me closure on this drought of not giving us a proper sequel. This was the surprise that I've been waiting for a super long time. So seriously, a big shout out to both Sega and Insomniac for making my 2018 so interesting by putting out these fantastic games. In the end, it really just came down to a game that I didn't know I wanted to a game that I've been waiting for so long, and I had so much want behind it that I kind of just had to go with my favorite.